I welcome you on behalf of the University of Florida IFAS Extension Polk County. I also want to welcome you on behalf of the City of Lakeland Water Utilities. They are sponsoring this Lunch and Learn, so thank you all so much for having us today. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself. I'm Julie Shelb. I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Polk County. Our webinar team often consists of myself or Ann Yazalana. She's our residential horticulture agent and Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator. And we have two Master Gardener volunteers online that are helping us today with Zoom. So thank you, Marcia and Betty, for that. We also have 2 Master Gardener volunteers, plus some additional staff that are helping in person. So thank you everyone who's helping to make this possible today. I really appreciate your help. We are an equal opportunity institution and that we strive to reach a diverse audience. If you feel that you have been discriminated against in any of our programs or any USDA program, you are free to file a complaint with the USDA. You can go to their website and complete the form to fill that out. You can call them at 866-632-9992, or you can also write a letter addressed to the USDA to file that complaint. We appreciate your participation today. Couple more slides and then we'll have Brittany step in. So today we're going to talk about container gardening. It's a really fun type of gardening and there's lots of versatility to it. And so we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But before we talk about container gardening, we're going to talk about some water conservation opportunities with the City of Lakeland. We're going to go over Florida Friendly Landscaping. As I mentioned, I work with that program. We're going to talk about why you might want to garden with containers. We'll also talk about planning your container garden. Just like a regular garden, gardening in a container has some considerations as well. We're going to talk about what types of containers you might consider. We'll look at some care and maintenance tips. And we'll also look at some beautiful photos of some examples of different types of container gardens. But before we get into all of that, I'm going to ask Brittany to just step up and talk a little bit about her programming here.
For a moment, I forgot we had Zoom. So I was over there and I was like, wait, I need to come over here. So I am, I guess, the new face of water conservation. Some of you may be familiar with Ruffin Gray. He was here previously. And I know in the survey, some people were really excited to see him. And unfortunately, he has already retired. So we're very happy for him, but I am taking his place in a sense. My name is Brittany Thornton. I am 6 months into this position, so fairly new. Water conservation programs that we offer, if you're not familiar, we have a toilet rebate program. That is where you can get $100 rebate if you purchase a WaterSense labeled 1.28 gallon per flush toilet. Now, your toilet that you're replacing has to be from 1994 or before. So it needs to be one of those older toilets that has a high flush volume, typically 3.5 gallons or more. So if that is something you're interested in, there is information on the website. You can call me, you can email me. That information is on the screen. But definitely something to look into if you're in that process of replacing toilets. We also offer a smart irrigation controller rebate. Basically, if you are using a ton of water irrigating and you're not really sure where or how that's happening, we can come in. We have an evaluator who can come in and audit. And then also you have the opportunity to get a smart controller rebate if you decide to purchase one of those, and that will definitely help get your water usage down. Other than that, we also offer conservation kits. Those are free for our City of Lakeland Water Utility customers. So if that's something you are interested in, again, there's an online form you can fill out. You can email me, call me, I will get that to you. It's got shower head aerators, kitchen sink aerator, just a bunch of different information, good stuff in there to help you save a little bit of water where you can. So if you ever have questions about water conservation, why your bill's so high, like continuously over and over again, always feel free to give me a call. I can try to help you out as much as I can. So okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany. We appreciate your help in today. And yes, if you're a City of Lakeland Water Utilities customer, please contact Brittany for more information on these rebate opportunities. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about Florida-friendly landscaping. So Florida-friendly landscaping, what is it? Well, it's a way that we can maintain our landscapes here in Florida, but maintain them in a way that we're conscious of our natural resources, our environment, but still have beautiful landscapes. And so by following the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping, we can reduce our use of water, fertilizer, and pesticides. So this was developed by the University of Florida and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And it's 9 easy to follow principles. I like to refer to them also as practices because we can all practice something, right? And so a little bit more into Florida-friendly landscaping. When you kind of think about your whole yard, how can you actually implement these practices? Well, the foundation of Florida-friendly landscaping is right plant, right place. And so when we choose plants that are suitable for our site conditions, those plants are better able to thrive. They're going to be less susceptible to pest and disease problems. And so even thinking about today in container gardening, right plant, right place applies. We also have watering efficiently. And so we want to make sure that we use this resource wisely. We also want to make sure that we water plants properly because overwatering and underwatering can be detrimental to plants, and it can also be a drain on our resources. So again, by using maybe micro irrigation, another type of low volume irrigation, grouping plants together, these are ways that we can water efficiently. We also want to make sure that we fertilize appropriately. And so thinking about our plants, what are our plants' needs? Your turf grass has different nutrient needs than maybe some of your landscape plants or some of your more woody, mature trees or shrubs. Many of our mature plants, especially our woody trees and shrubs, don't need supplemental or additional fertilizer once they're established. And so look at your plants. Are you seeing signs that maybe there is a nutrient deficiency? Have you investigated how you're maintaining these plants? You know, what are your watering practices? What are there any pest issues? We also want to investigate other things other than just adding fertilizer. And if a plant's already stressed, adding fertilizer is not going to help that plant recover any better or any faster. If anything, it can actually stress the plant more, particularly if that plant is water stressed. So again, think about your plants, how you're maintaining them, and what are their fertilizer needs. Think about your soil pH as well. Again, depending on your pH, that can affect the nutrients available to your plants. We also want to utilize mulch in the landscape. And so mulch is a great Florida-friendly practice. We recommend a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch. We recommend a plant-based organic mulch, meaning that it contains carbon and breaks down, not like certified organic as in our fruits and vegetables. But think about pine straw, pine bark. Melaleuca is an invasive tree in South Florida, and that's a perfectly safe mulch to use in your landscape. You're helping reduce that invasive tree by using the mulch that they take from that tree as it's harvested. Eucalyptus is another Florida-friendly mulch. And if you were a fan of cypress, we don't recommend cypress because it's not sustainable. 1, knowing where it was harvested from, but 2, the rate at which it grows and harvested is just not sustainable. So eucalyptus is a great alternative. We don't recommend rock or gravel around your plants. Those are great permeable surfaces for maybe driveways or sidewalks or pathways, but not around your plants because they're not contributing anything to the soil. They could actually be creating some type of microclimate. They could even heat up the soil and disturb the healthy bacteria and microorganisms that are beneficial to your plants. So again, choose those tree-based mulches around your plants and in your landscape beds, and always keep the mulch pulled away. A few inches around your perennial plants, several inches around your shrubs, and 12 to 18 inches away from the trunks of your tree. We like mulch. It helps reduce weeds and helps retain moisture, but we don't want it packed up against our plants because it could retain moisture against the trunk and cause issues there, cause our plants to decline. We also want to attract wildlife. When we think about our landscapes, it can be a habitat for wildlife. It could be pollinators like bees and butterflies and different birds. Different other types of wildlife. So think about the plants that you choose for your landscape, the flowers that may provide nectar, pollen, the fruits that may provide fruit for other animals, and not even the flowers and the fruit, but also think about the habitat that it provides, the shelter that those plants can provide. And so think about vertical layering, having ground covers, having shrubs, having trees, and thinking about the different levels that different wildlife like to or prefer to live in. And so creating your landscape and also thinking about the practices that you use in your landscape, how you're maintaining it, and is that beneficial or harmful to our wildlife? And that kind of ties into managing yard pests responsibly, another Florida-friendly landscaping principle. We know we have insects out in our landscape, right? It seems like we have tons all the time, but they're not all bad. And so getting out there, scouting regularly, learning to correctly identify which insects are beneficial and which may be harmful. Knowing when treatment is necessary, if at all. Again, if you pay attention, sometimes you may notice you have insects, but maybe you have a predator insect or a beneficial insect that's helping to take care of the problem. Maybe no action is needed on your end, but sometimes action is needed. Maybe the plants are stressed, and maybe that's something you need to consider why they're having pest or disease problems. So again, managing yard pests responsibly. A few other Florida-friendly landscaping principles. We want to recycle our yard waste. That's as simple as when you mow the lawn, leaving the grass clippings on the lawn. Instead of raking them up and putting them out for garbage, when you leave them on the lawn, as they break down, they're providing nutrients in the soil that the grass can then take up. Another way, if you have trees that lose their leaves, instead of raking up all of those leaves, just let those trees create a self-mulching area. As those leaves fall, they're creating a mulch. They're going to reduce weeds, help retain soil moisture, and you're reducing your work in the yard by not raking those up. Now, of course, those can all go into a compost pile if you need to add to a compost, and composting is another way to recycle yard waste by adding those materials in there. But again, by keeping those materials on site rather than putting them in the landfill, we're recycling them back into our own yards and putting those nutrients back into our soils that our plants can then take up. The last two principles of Florida friendly, we want to reduce stormwater runoff. The pollution associated with stormwater runoff here in Florida is a huge issue. We have our rainy season and we have lots of rain, right? We have lots of development in Florida as well. And so with all of these new buildings and roads and driveways, rain falls on our roofs. Hopefully we have gutters and downspouts that are directing it into our lawn and landscape areas, but often there's not enough room, or we're not directing that water into places where it can filter on site. And so instead it runs off. Maybe it picks up excess nutrients from misused fertilizer, maybe from leaves that are in the street, maybe chemicals and other oils and things like that. It might pick up over impermeable surfaces, surfaces where water can't filter through. It ends up in some body of water, right? Whether it's a natural body of water or a stormwater pond. And so we want to reduce that water flowing off site because of all of the pollution that's associated with it. So by utilizing rain barrels, creating rain gardens, directing our downspouts into our lawn and landscape areas, these are ways that we can reduce stormwater runoff. Again, using that rock or gravel as your driveway or your sidewalk, again, that's a permeable surface that water, especially that rainwater, can stay on site. And then finally, we want to protect the waterfront. And so we know we're in Florida, we're a peninsula, so 3 sides of our state are surrounded by water. But when we look in our own neighborhoods, we have so many bodies of water, right? Especially here in Polk County. So we want to protect that water. So if you live on a body of water, we would recommend that you create a 10-foot maintenance-free zone. No mowing, no fertilizing, and no pesticide use to create a buffer that helps protect that body of water. And so by reducing all of those practices, you're helping protect that water. You're keeping excess nutrients out of there. Of course, think about all of the practices that we're doing in our landscapes. We're all contributing to either a positive or negative impact on our environment. So again, by implementing these 9 principles or practices in the way you maintain your landscape, you're going to help benefit our environment and protect our natural resources, particularly our water resources here in Florida. So those are the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping. And you'll see they tie in very much to container gardening, which we're going to dig into now. So why would you even want to use containers for gardening? Well, I certainly would not recommend an entire landscape or yard full of container gardening, but depending on your living situation, they can definitely add to it, or they may be your only source of gardening. So if you have limited space, you can garden in a container. You can even put a butterfly garden in a container if you have a patio that pollinators and other butterflies have access to. It can be quite convenient when you think about it. If you only have to step out the door and have access to these beautiful plants, a container is sometimes the only option. Certainly with containers themselves, there can be lots of different color and texture, but even the plants that we utilize in these containers can brighten up a spot. It's a great way to utilize annual plants as well. We wouldn't want an entire landscape or bed of annual plants. Why is that? Well, one, they need lots of input, right? They're seasonal, so we've got to change them out. They usually need a little more water, fertilizer as well. So again, it's a little higher maintenance, but maybe a container or two of annual plants can really bring the season to you. There's certainly annual plants for every season, and if that's a way that you decorate, that's a great option. Herbs are also easy to grow in containers. It's one of my favorite ways to grow herbs. I keep them close by the door so that when I'm cooking, I can just run outside, make a few snips, and run back in and have fresh herbs for cooking. Of course, vegetables can also be grown in containers. So again, if you have limited space or you just want to start with vegetable gardening, this might be a way to do that. Again, thinking about the beauty that container gardens add, it could be a focal point in a landscape or even on a patio or a porch. We're going to show some examples of even how container gardens, the plants themselves, or even containers can actually brighten up a spot in a shade garden. And it can be a temporary accent. You know, maybe you just have something going on at your home and you want to just welcome your guests with this container. You can have this temporary container to help do that. Containers also give us access to easily change out plants. So when you think about it, you know, maybe you like that seasonal color. And so that container can be something you change out every season. Again, we talked about a special event you're having. You can just plop that container in with those beautiful plants. And maybe you'll keep it and maybe it'll keep going year round. Container gardens can also be moved out of the way. Maybe we're here in the middle of winter here in Florida, and we can receive pretty cool temperatures, right? Depending on how cool our winter gets, we could get frost. And so if you have some more sensitive plants, if they're in a container, you can bring them in. Also think about our summer season or our hurricane season. Maybe you have some sensitive plants in containers. You can also bring those in so they may not be damaged during a hurricane. Another thing to consider with container gardens is maybe you're growing some plants that need specialized soil and that they need a certain pH. And so with a container garden, you can grow those plants, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And finally, you may be able to restrain some plants. So you might think, well, what does that mean? Well, if you've ever tried to grow mint, you might understand what I'm saying. Mint is a spreading plant. If you put it in the container, you're going to keep it contained, right? There's some other plants when you think about Sansevieria, also known as snake plant or mother-in-law's tongue, some people call it. We do not recommend that out in the landscape. It has invasive potential, but you can grow it in a container and keep it from spreading in the landscape. So again, certain plants may be more suited to be contained in those beautiful pots. Now, there are some considerations for container gardening, right? It's not as simple as just getting a pot, throwing a plant in, and calling it a day. All the things we talked about with Florida-friendly landscaping apply to your container gardens. And the foundation of that is right plant, right place. So again, even with your container garden, whether you're growing plants outside on a patio, out in the yard, or even indoors in your own home in a container, you want to think about right plant, right place. What does that mean? Well, you want to think about sunlight for sure. How much sun are you receiving? What do these plants prefer? Again, you know, full sun, part shade, morning sun. Also think about if you're growing indoors, what the climate is like. It might be a little bit different. You might need to try a few different windows out to get the correct lighting for your plants as well. Because even indoors, plants can suffer from inappropriate or in the incorrect amount of sunlight or lack thereof. So we want to think about amount of sun. We also want to think about the type of soil. We want to think about watering these plants. How much moisture do they need? How large of a space do they need? We think about the mature size of plants. Well, we also need to think about, especially for container gardening, how much space do those roots need to grow? You know, if we find this really cute little pot and we try to throw this plant in that is going to have really deep, wide roots, that plant may suffer. We may not be able to water enough to keep up with that plant. So again, matching plants and pots so that we allow enough soil and we can water properly, so we're not overwatering. We're not allowing those plants to sit in water, but we're also not underwatering or not have the ability to keep up with watering those plants. We'll also look at pest management with container gardens and thinking about that, fertilizing appropriately, all of these aspects to container gardens. And like I said, you can even grow a butterfly garden in a container, so you can provide for wildlife even in that way. We have a great example at our extension office. We have a Florida-friendly landscaping demonstration garden, and we have a new display that we put in last year that has a butterfly garden in a container. So you can utilize host plants for the caterpillars, but also flowering nectar plants for the adult butterflies. Now, some other considerations with container gardens are a little more aesthetically pleasing. So there are the concept of thrillers, spillers, and fillers. And so when you're designing your container garden, you might want to think about what types of plants are going in and following this design concept. And so with thrillers, spillers, and fillers, you want to think about a tall center plant as your thriller. Then you're going to add some filler plants. So these are kind of medium-sized plants, maybe kind of rounded, that are going to kind of fill in. And then you can also consider adding some trailing spiller plants. So plants that are going to hang over the side and add that effect. Ground covers can be a great option for that. While we definitely recommend ground covers as turf alternatives in certain situations, you might even utilize some of those same ground covers in a container garden, and they'll spill over the edge of the container. Just one more thought on this thrillers, spillers, and fillers. So again, any plant that adds some kind of height. Often we might think of spiky plants like ornamental grasses, but again, just something tall, maybe tall and flowering as well. But again, think kind of narrow but tall, something that grabs the eye there. And then you're going to want, again, for the filler, something that kind of fills around, maybe a mounding flowering plant, or even a mounding foliage plant, depending on the color that you'd like to add to that container. And then again, with those spillers, you're thinking of something that's going to trail over the edge. So again, there's tons of flowering plants and even ground covers that will hang over the side and add an extra aspect to that container garden. Now, of course, you don't have to do this concept with every container garden, but maybe for that focal point or that accent by the front entrance, you might try this concept of thrillers, fillers, and spillers for your container garden. Now, you've decided to do a container garden. Well, you need to think about what container you're going to use and what are some aspects to that container. One, we want to make sure that it's large enough to accommodate soil and roots of that plant as that plant grows. Another consideration is that you need some type of drainage. So having a pot with a hole is an easy way to do that. If you don't have drainage, you run the risk of water sitting in that pot and those roots rotting and that plant eventually declining and ultimately not thriving and having to replace it. It could also lead to pest issues when you think about that water in that pot. If it's constantly wet, there's reduced oxygen in that soil. That's also going to slowly cause that plant to decline. So again, we want to have enough room. We want to have drainage. But then you want to think about something that fits your space as well. And so you can get creative. You can recycle old items. You can make new pots as well. There's one type of gardening craft called hypertufa, and our Master Gardener volunteers offer that class periodically throughout the year, where you can make a container for plants to grow, and it's out, it has some special materials, and that's the photo that you'll see, the last photo on the right. Those are hypertufa containers. Again, you can get creative, recycle old items, maybe old boots or baskets or buckets, and you can garden in those as well. But again, you want to make sure your container has enough room for the plant, enough room for the soil, and also that drainage is available. If you don't have holes in your container, you might consider drilling holes. If it's a small enough container that you can control, you could consider putting maybe some rock or gravel in the bottom to allow that water to fall into that space to get out of the root zone and the soil zone. But again, if it's a really large pot and you tend to overwater, that may not be the best option for you. One more thing, thinking back to containers, is that some of our more delicate containers, think about maybe you have this beautiful wicker basket that would just look gorgeous with a plant coming out of it. But over time, that soil and water is really just going to deteriorate that. Maybe consider putting another pot inside and just using another container on the outside of that pot as the decorative element, as well as the plants to that container. So more sensitive containers or pots, consider putting something else inside of there to help protect those surfaces. Now, once you're ready to plant your container gardens, there's some considerations as well. Just like with planting outdoors, we need to be conscious of how we're planting to make sure that these plants are better able to thrive and be more successful. So one thing with your containers is you might want to consider starting with something clean, right? Maybe you picked this up off the side of the road. Maybe someone gave it to you. You don't know what was used in here previously. Maybe this pot would be really nice if you would just scrub it a little bit and it would be absolutely beautiful. So consider cleaning your containers. Maybe initially that's just scrubbing off some of the soil that's on there or whatever else might be on there, maybe a little soap and water. Maybe you need to get some rust off of your containers. You might consider a 50-50 solution of water and vinegar on your containers. Maybe you actually need to sanitize these containers because maybe there were some plant disease issues, you're just really not sure, and it's better to start with a clean pot. At that point, you might do a bleach solution with 10 parts water to 1 part bleach, and then of course, rinse the pots after that. So you can help sanitize the pots. So once you're ready, you have your clean pots, if that's what you're choosing to utilize, you wanna put some soil in the pot. Then you wanna get the plant that you're gonna put in there. Go ahead and put that in there next. Now, when you're setting that in, it might take a little back and forth because you wanna make sure ultimately that you leave a couple inches between the top soil line and the top of your container. Why is that? Well, when you go to water, if you've got soil up to the line of the pot, rest assured that soil is probably going to run over with that water. So then you've got a mess to clean up. So instead, just make sure that your soil line is about 1 to 2 inches below the pot to allow for some excess water and maybe the soil and the materials in the soil if they tend to float a little bit. So you put your soil in, put your plant, adjust the height of that, and you want the top of the soil line to be at the top of the root ball. This is a common mistake we make out in the landscape as well. We think just pack the soil on halfway up the stem, right? That's enough soil. That's again too much soil. We want to aim for the top of the root ball in our container gardens and also outdoors. We often plant plants way too deep in the landscape, and that can be part of the decline of plants when those roots are too deep and have too much soil on top. So again, be conscious of that. Of course, you might be following that thriller, spiller, filler. If that's the case, you're going to take some time, put that thriller in, and then you're going to carefully arrange your fillers and your spillers as well, along with the soil. Now you can use mulch in your container gardens as well. It can add a nice touch, kind of make it look a little cleaner. It can also help reduce weeds just like it does out in the landscape. So again, if that's appropriate for your container, you might consider utilizing mulch. So again, just a few steps as you plant your container garden. Now, some care and maintenance tips, some things you might want to consider. Always with your container garden and even outdoors, check the soil before you water. Again, with container gardens, depending on where they're located, if they're under cover, you're their only source of water. So that's quite a responsibility on you. Now, if these container gardens are outside where they may receive rain, again, you want to check because if they're already wet from previous rain, you don't want to overwater. Same as if they're under cover, if someone has gone behind you or ahead of you and watered them, maybe they don't need excess water. So again, feel the soil. If it feels wet, go ahead and wait on watering. Now, again, with certain plants, you may need to let them completely dry in between waterings. Some you may need to water more frequently, but again, you don't want to keep the soil soggy and too wet because that's going to cause those plants to decline at a much faster rate. You also want to monitor for pests, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just keep an eye, just like your regular outside garden or landscape, you want to scout regularly. Again, when we catch problems early, they can often be a little easier to treat than down the road. Is the plant stressed? Why do I have pest problems? Have I been over fertilizing? Are there too many salts left in the soil from over fertilizing? That's definitely a consideration in the landscape and also with your container gardens. When you think about orchids, sometimes it's recommended to actually bring them, if they're indoors, maybe take them over a sink or a bathtub and actually allow that water to flush all the way through to flush some of those excess salts out. So again, with your container garden, you could be the cause of some of the stress or the issues with it. And of course, fertilize as needed. We want to think about the needs of our plants and match the fertilizer to those needs. Speaking of fertilizing, you also want to consider your soil pH, and we mentioned that earlier. Container gardening can be great for plants that maybe need a specialized soil or have a specific pH that's required. You can create that in your container garden. It might be a little hard to see, but that chart on the left shows, depending on your soil pH, what nutrients may be available. And so you can see with more acidic soils, the nutrients may be limited. But with certain plants, as indicated with this blueberry bush here, that's a plant that thrives in more acidic soils. So we can put our blueberry plants in a container and kind of create a more acidic soil in that pot. And so how do you know soil pH? Well, you have to have it tested. You can't just look at the soil and know the pH. So I would encourage you to get your pH tested. Maybe if you're starting out gardening or if you're seeing some issues with your plants, maybe have your soil pH tested. Our office offers that, our plant clinic. You can also find other places. There's also the Soils Lab in Gainesville that can do pH plus nutrients as well. So there's lots of opportunities to have your soil pH tested. Now, we've talked about, we don't want to overwater, we don't want to underwater. So it may take a little bit of learning, right? Depending on the type of container you have, that may be affecting how often you need to water, whether that pot is helping to hold moisture in, or if it's allowing that plant the water to evaporate a little more quickly. So maybe we just need to take some time and learn how frequently, and it may also be seasonally as well. When you think about maybe right now, temperatures are cooler, the water's not evaporating, being used as much, but come summertime, it could be a little hotter and drier depending on where your container is. If it's not out in the yard receiving rain, it could dry out a little more frequently. You may need to water. So again, you want to check the pots to see how often they need to be watered. And remember, when the soil gets too dry, it can actually become hydrophobic and repel the water. So it may take time for that water to be able to soak back into that pot. Micro irrigation is a great option for your container gardens, especially if you don't always remember to water or if you aren't always available to water your plants, especially if they're outside. You can set up a battery operated system with little micro sprayers or micro drippers, and you can set it to water every couple days, maybe once a week, however often is needed for your plants. But again, you can ensure that those plants will be watered if you're not available. And you're also utilizing water in a more efficient manner. With micro irrigation, it's low volume, it's 30 gallons per hour or less. And often with the way micro irrigation is, the micro sprayers or the drip are low to the ground or the soil level. So you're losing less water to evaporation like high volume sprinklers out in the landscape. Now, we've kind of talked a little bit about pests, what could be causing pest problems. So again, remember to think about what's happening. You know, is this plant not receiving the right amount of sun? Am I overwatering it? Am I over fertilizing it? You know, has it been 5 years since I've replenished the soil in this plant maybe? Consider what might be happening, but also learn to identify pests as you see them. So often pests can be a sign of a stressed plant, or they may be indicative of a plant that is prone to certain pests. So again, we want to do a little research, contact the extension office, our plant clinic if you have questions about plants to kind of learn about what's going on and learn how to treat those plants properly. So again, could be external factors, could be temperature, could be something we're doing to the plants that are stressing them. But again, with our container gardens, just like our landscape plants, we want to check, we want to correctly identify and decide if action is necessary. Now, with that said, are you able to recognize different problems or insects in the landscape? I've asked everyone not to mention anything yet, but just take a second, look at these photos. Would you know what these are out in the landscape? Would you know how to treat these if necessary? So just a couple seconds. So the photo on the top left is a lubber grasshopper. Probably want to deal with that, right? They tend to chew. They have a chewing mouth part. They're going to chew your plants up. The photo in the top middle is a leaf-footed bug. Now this could be confused with several different insects, especially the younger or nymph stage of this insect could be confused for a beneficial insect. So again, you want to learn to correctly identify and learn to identify these insects at different stages as well. On the right top, we have a praying mantis. So again, that's considered a good bug. They're kind of they eat everything. So we just let them be because they often will eat the bad bugs that we don't want. What about that photo on the bottom left? How many of you would consider thinking you need to treat that insect if you saw it? Potentially, it looks a little scary, right? Well, that's actually a type of lady beetle. And so lady beetles don't always look the same. They can look a little different. The photo in the middle, if you saw this on a leaf and you knew that leaf was supposed to be green, but you saw this kind of black covering on the leaf, we call it sooty mold. Well, the sooty mold can be a problem, but it's usually an indication of a soft-bodied insect nearby. And so that sooty mold grows on top of the honeydew that's excreted from that soft-bodied insect. And so again, why do you have that soft-bodied insect nearby? Is this plant stressed? Is this just a seasonal issue? Again, thinking back to container gardening, think about where your plant is. Maybe it's not getting good air circulation, too much water, it's a little stressed, and it's got some pest issues. And then that photo on the bottom right, again, this is not to scale, but that's also a different lady beetle, and that's a larval stage. That's a younger stage of a lady beetle. So again, if you saw that insect and if you saw it to scale, it would be pretty tiny, but you'd be able to see it and you would know, hey, I have lady beetles. Those are good bugs. I want to let those young lady beetles grow up and help manage other pests. And maybe they're there because you do have aphids or something. And so you've got that life cycle going that's helping to deal with that problem. So again, think about what you see and whether action is even necessary. We've talked a lot about fertilizer, but again, knowing your plant's needs, knowing how often to fertilize, think about when plants are actively growing. Again, when plants aren't actively growing, or maybe they're not in their blooming season, we don't need to be fertilizing, right? Those nutrients may not be taken up. Sometimes we want to consider giving our plants a rest. You might consider, well, it's a container, so I need to give it those excess nutrients, right? Well, maybe it also needs a break. Maybe you don't need to always be fertilizing your container gardens. Again, it's just going to depend on what you're growing. If it's a vegetable garden, well, fertilizer is probably pretty important, right? If it's just a foliage plant with beautiful leaves that just adds that beauty to your container, maybe it doesn't need as much fertilizer. And also think about those two plants have completely different nutrient needs, so the same fertilizer may not be beneficial to each plant. So again, get to know your plants, know what they need, know when to fertilize them. Even your container gardens don't need fertilizer necessarily year round. Now, another maintenance tip with your container gardens is to consider deadheading or prune tipping them. And so again, as we do this, we're removing spent blooms or blooms that have faded away. Now, this can be very beneficial to many of your flowering annuals or perennials, because as you trim those flowers off that have faded, you're stopping the plant from going into its end of cycle, right? Because as those flowers fade, what comes next often? The seeds. So the plant's kind of trying to regenerate because it's kind of coming to the end of life or going into that cycle. So one, we can help prolong these plants, but also it can make them kind of beautiful, right? When we think about our container gardens, if it's a container that's maybe in a accent spot or a focal point, we want to keep it looking beautiful. So by deadheading or removing those flowers, you may also want to tip prune. And so by tip pruning, you're actually pruning to help that plant kind of bush out. Maybe it's become kind of leggy. Now that could be a light issue, so you might want to consider that as well, but maybe it just needs a little bit of pruning. And so by pruning it, you're going to help that plant bush out a little bit and look a little bit nicer in the container. So again, it could be a great exercise as well. And you think about it, you're taking a little bit of time. What is it? Maybe 5 minutes a day, not every day, obviously, but maybe 5 minutes once a week, once every 2 weeks, you're going out to that container and just pruning off those spent flowers. So those are just some care and maintenance considerations that you might think of for your container gardens to keep them beautiful. And so now we'll look at just a few examples of container gardens, some things to maybe spark your interest or give you an idea or two to try out in your own home. And so you can see here, some old wagons have been used. Now, one thing to keep in mind that we talked about with your container gardens is you want to make sure they have drainage, right? So sometimes we can have a beautiful container, but we may need to modify it to make sure that it actually functions and keeps our plants beautiful and healthy. Now, you may not have thought of this, but your container garden, you can add a nice little trellis to that garden and grow a vine in that container or that pot. And so by adding just a little bit of height with that trellis, you can grow plants that might normally just fall all over, become messy, might have been spillers. You can turn those into a single thriller or focal point in a pot. You might also consider elevating your containers. They may not need to just sit on the ground. Maybe you've got a pedestal or a table or a chair that you can set them on and just elevate those plants and just change the look of that part of the garden or a patio or whatever it is. Again, that thriller, spiller, filler concept, and even different color combination as well. I love that photo on the left with the purple colors and that chartreuse green. Absolutely beautiful. So again, you can get creative with the different containers and the different plants that you allow. That sweet potato vine is a great spiller plant for your containers there on the left. Here's a way that you can utilize container gardens for kind of seasonal flowers or annual plants in color. So the photo on the left, during the winter, they were able to use poinsettia plants as the filler. And they've got that nice tall thriller in the middle, that some type of probably holly, and then they've got a vining plant for the spiller. Then in the photo on the right, in the spring, they were able to add petunias, different color, again, a different season that those flowers can evoke for you. So lots of options. Herbs are a great option to grow in containers as well. Like I mentioned, I love to grow herbs in containers, especially nearby a door. That way I can just run outside, snip those herbs, and then run back in. Think about your container gardens also as a focal point. We've talked about lots of different small plants for that one concept of container gardening, but maybe you can just put one large plant in there that's appropriate and allow it to be a focal point. So you can see the palm on the left. There's a nice firecracker plant in the middle there, and then I believe some type of fern there on the right again, but these are being used as focal points. Here's an example. We talked about brightening up maybe a shady part of the garden, whether it's through the containers themselves or the plants that you add that have that pop of color in the containers. Now, again, I want to reiterate, I would not recommend an entire garden of containers because that's a lot of extra watering, right? We have to water these container gardens, but when used appropriately, we can add little pops to different areas of our home or landscape. Here's another concept that you might consider. You can use the cinder blocks and arrange them to actually grow succulents in them. So we can grow succulents here. Again, you want to be cautious with your succulents. You want to have good drainage because we do have a rainy season and that can be kind of hard on some succulents. But again, with good drainage and the right container, they can grow. And so here's just another idea. Maybe you have a patio, you'd like to add a little corner piece to it. You could utilize this concept and build your own block container and grow succulents in it. We talked about edible gardening. We talked about blueberries specifically and needing a specific soil pH. And so by growing blueberries in a container, you can control that pH. Maybe you can get creative and utilize some old crates and some burlap and create a container as well. Give it a try. If you have that available and you like that look, it's just something a little bit different. Here's even some other creative options on the left there. You've got some old colanders that have been arranged to hold plants. You've got lots of good drainage in those containers, right? And then in the photo on the right, they've also created this kind of towering container garden, lots of spillers in there hanging over. And then just a few more thoughts to consider. Maybe you have some pieces that you just can't get rid of. Maybe they can hold a plant. Remember to always include drainage in these these containers. You've got that cute little truck with some succulents, some old boots. If you like that look, just be sure to drill some holes in the bottom of those boots. And I guess if you collect handbags, maybe you don't have a use for those anymore, and you can grow some plants in there. No guarantees on how well any of these do. I've not done it myself, but definitely some beautiful photos and inspiration for you. We've got we have a list of references and resources for you, some great information on container gardening. There's also a link that talks about homemade potting mix, and we will send these links out to you, so don't worry. Everyone who's registered online and in person, we will email this to you, so we certainly appreciate you being here. But again, lots of information on container gardening, vegetable gardening, fruit, arranging your garden, soils, and even a list of Florida-friendly landscaping resources. So again, we talked a lot about different aspects of container gardening. We looked at the 9 principles of Florida-friendly landscaping, and we even heard about some water conservation opportunities with the city of Lakeland. Brittany just reiterated, if you have any questions about water conservation or just any water utility questions, please give her a call. She's available. We want to say thank you again to City of Lakeland for having us. And we talked about water conservation opportunities with City of Lakeland. But if you are a water utility customer for somewhere else here in Polk County, please feel free to reach out to savepolkwater.org. There you can find all the other water utilities here in Polk County and what rebates they have available regarding water conservation. Again, thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our office. We have a plant clinic. We have Master Gardener volunteers. We are here to help you. So please contact us.